on the board. I'm also a member of the Aging Committee. And hello, everybody. Happy New Year.
Thank you, James. And going from James to Jim.
Well, on the screen it says James, but anyway.
But we straightened that out months ago, right?
Oh, no, we did. Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, so I'm Jim Berlin. I've been on the community board decades, and I'm still, it hasn't done me in yet. And I welcome everyone for the new year, and I hope we will do great things together.
Thank you. Daniel.
Hi, hopefully you guys can hear me. My name is Daniel. I've been on the community board for about 2 years. I'm also on the Parks and Cultural Affairs Committee, and welcome.
Thank you. Tanya.
Hi, I'm Tanya. I've been on the board for like 5 years and some change. And I'm also on the Health and Environment Committee and live in Washington Heights. And Happy New Year, everybody.
Thank you. Kimberly.
Hi, my name is Kimberly McCoy, and I am new to this board. I just got here in June, and I am also on Health and Hospitals, and I am glad to be here. Nice to meet you.
Health and Environment.
Thank you. Sorry. Thank you. Wait, I'm still new.
Aisha.
Hello, my name is Aisha Ogilvy. I've been on the board for 9 years. I'm also on Housing and Human Services.
Thank you, Aisha. And I also see a board member who is not on the committee, but Jamila, why don't you introduce yourself as well?
Hi, everyone. I'm Jamila Sandoval, just here on behalf of the council member, Carmen De La Rosa, just being a fly on the wall to learn more from each committee. And I want to say Happy New Year, and it's nice to see all the funny faces again.
And maybe one day when we stop getting double and triple viruses, we'll meet in person.
Yes, hopefully one day.
So a couple of things on the agenda. And I think Catherine Diaz, our new board chair, said that she might join us for a bit, but cannot stay long, but she's not with us yet. And if she joins us and wants to address the committee, we can break for that. Just a couple of things that I wanted to provide updates to the, one to provide an update to the committee on, and the other is for us to have a conversation regarding the, Cumming Street BSA application. I reached out to BSA to get an update on the status of the application directly from it, because, the information that the committee has been receiving since the summer has been somewhat indirect. And, I thought it best for us to find out directly from BSA where the application was. So I reached out to the contact that we were using in the past, and she updated me as of December 29th. And earlier today I shared that email thread with the committee members. So the last BSA hearing for this application was in November, and the materials that were reviewed, and I shared those as well via email, although they were also accessible by the link in the email thread. The drawings and the statement of facts are as of October of 2022. So that shows the, the design and the summary, as of the end of last year. The next and final hearing with the BSA for this application is April 10th or 11th. And the materials are due to be submitted to BSA on March 16th. And I would suggest that I asked BSA to forward those materials to us as soon as they receive them. I think it would be worthwhile for us to invite the applicant to brief us on the updated application, either, for the March meeting, which will be before they're submitted. But my assumption is by the beginning of March, the materials that will be submitted in mid-March would be pretty much finalized. So, I think that would be a worthwhile thing for us to do. The design has been modified. The Board of Standards and Appeals is actually looking for the applicant to provide them with revised financial information, some revised engineering information, particularly as it pertains to the hardship related to the rock and fill. And the board requested that the applicant advise the community board as well as residential neighbors within a 400-foot radius of the site 20 days prior to the April hearing. We know about it now, so we have that notice, well in advance. But, one of the things that we heard in the summer, which when we reached out to LPC was not quite correct, is that, LPC had asked them to make a presentation to the board, which didn't happen. I think it's more likely that based on this communication, the BSA probably asked them to provide notice to the board. So, we have that notice more than 20 days in advance. And I think as part of our strategy would be to invite the applicant, to give us, an update on, not the October documents, because that's not what they're going to discuss in April, but rather on whatever they are going to submit in March. And if what they submit in March is not materially different, fine. But, whatever updated financial information and engineering information is provided, we should get that in addition to any modifications to the design. So, that's what I have. That's the most recent information that I have on this. Vivian.
I was just watching the hearing actually, and they said that it's not a landmark church, that it's up for National Register. Is that not the case?
Well, yeah, actually, we discussed that some time ago where the SHPO, I guess, declined to list it.
And they never applied to the city, or they?
Vivian, I don't. But the church, the work on the church is done.
Right.
So the new construction does not impact that. We all thought it was, rather odd that, given the architect and all that, SHPO did not pursue it, but they didn't. Do we have other questions, comments? And I mean, also for the newer committee members who probably were who were not in the committee meeting when this application was discussed. Any questions? James?
I'm unfamiliar what the term SHPO represents.
The State Historic Preservation Office. So at the city level for landmark designation, it's the landmarks, commissioners who do that. For National Register listing, it's through the state, actually through this, I think State Parks does it. And the commissioner of state parks is also the State Historic Preservation Officer. So what Vivian was mentioning is whether, the church building or one of the church buildings was eligible for listing. And I believe an application was submitted to have it listed, but SHPO did not, move forward with that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Anything else, committee members?
So are we actually discussing this building now?
It was not my intention to discuss it because, as I said, I think what we should discuss is whatever is the revised submission. But if you have, questions or comments, by all means.
Well, I agree with you that we should invite the people who are building this, because as I pointed out, I sent out a marked up diagram of their parking garage. And essentially it's unworkable, because if one of your cars is on the top of the lift mechanism in the back, basically 3 cars have to be moved so you can get out. And there's no room to do it now. We had a little sidebar, Wayne and I, and it could be that this garage, would be manned 24/7, but it's only a 48 car garage. And I did a calculation. I'm estimating that the hourly cost of employees, and not the lifts or anything else, would be $20 an hour. And if you do the arithmetic, that automatically adds $300 a month per parking space just to have this person there 24/7 to juggle all the cars. So, when they come, I think, this is one of the points I will make, but I wanted to make my views, I wanted to share my views with all of you. They drew a garage, but, it's not a workable garage in any sense of we had many years ago, there's a building this is irrelevant, but very interesting, a building at the western end of Dykeman Street that was a powerhouse for the trains, and is now a rest station and stuff for the parks, and has storage in it. And someone actually drew an auditorium in it with hundreds of seats to prove that they want. Turns out the seats actually were the size for little children, and normal people couldn't have sat in them. So, yes, they have a garage, but I dare them to tell us how they're going to run it. So maybe I will do that.
Well, I mean, once again, we can invite them, or should invite them, to attend. And if we have questions that we want them to address, there's no reason we can't pose those questions in advance so they are prepared to answer them. I mean, being a Manhattan brat, not owning a car, but I do know that all over the city of New York, there are parking operations that use stackers, which by default means that, it's valet or attended parking. And, maybe in the interim, we can also reach out to, Debbie in Traffic and Transportation, or just to, contacts that, we or the borough president might have in the parking industry, talk about how those operations work. Because, I mean, they do in fact exist, and they do in fact work, but no, they're not self-park at all.
If I could just interject, I forgot to mention that I'm a member of the Traffic and Transportation Committee. And actually, I live in a co-op that runs a 525 car garage with attendants.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a whole different operation.
Yeah,
but
with or without stackers.
Oh no, we've got lots and lots of square feet.
Yeah, exactly. Right. I see Steve has joined us. Steve, would you like to introduce yourself for the new year?
I'm the same as I was last time. Steve Simon.
Yeah, Steve, as you know, every other committee member, introduced themselves at the beginning of the meeting. So we were just giving you the opportunity to do the same. And as I explained before you logged on, I reached out to our contact at BSA and got an update directly from it, in late December on the status of the BSA application. I shared that email thread with the committee earlier today. The last meeting, or last hearing, was in November. The materials reviewed are the materials that are dated, October 2022. The next, and according to BSA, last hearing is in April on the 10th or the 11th. The materials for that hearing are due to BSA on March 15th, and we discuss inviting the applicant probably to the March meeting to brief us on what it will submit to BSA at mid-month.
Does it seem unusual that they would schedule a hearing like 4 months down the line, that they're taking so much time to deal with this?
BSA has, and I guess city planning has as well before they certify. BSA doesn't have any particular, timeframes.
Yeah, I know.
To work with. So yeah, I whether it's unusual or not, I don't know, but that's the time frame. It could be a matter also of coordinating vacations.
Or it does seem as though they're taking a long time to deal with this.
This is the information that I obtained directly from BSA.
I appreciate that.
This is what I'm sharing.
It's more information than we've had up to now.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's also what I pointed out, that the information that we were receiving, in the summer and even at the December general meeting, it was all really second hand, which is not really useful for us to make an informed decision on anything. And I reached out to the contact at BSA and got a response, rather quickly. So I don't know, what prevents that from happening, on a more regular basis. But, we're in the loop. I asked for BSA to send us the information when they receive it in March, and they said yes.
It does seem as though, if I may, it does seem as though this plan is premised on the idea that they are going to remove apparently most, if not all, of the outcropping on the site. I mean,
that does appear to be the case, because if you look at the materials, it's a 9-story building, and it's not a 9-story building sitting on top of 2 stories of rock.
right.
That is probably one of the reasons why, and I would be curious as well. 2 of the things that BSA has asked for updated financials, because this has to make the project more expensive. And Jim's calculation of parking, I'm sure that parking, and as well as just the rent, is going up, because of all the excavation. And the other thing that BSA has asked for is updated engineering information pertaining to the removal of the rock.
Yeah,
So
well, I think we would be interested in seeing that as well.
yeah, well, that's why I asked them to send us the material when they get it.
Yeah, and but it strikes me though that since they were saying that the large rock outcropping was a major hardship for them, somehow they seem to have figured out a way to overcome that hardship.
Well, I mean, I would reflect back on Jim Berlin's comments. You can always show a scenario where, the rock is removed. The question is, what does that do to the finances of, the project? They never said it couldn't be done. They said it was not financially, feasible to do. And now we'll see what that means.
Yeah, and I think we would also want to know what possible impact it might have on the adjacent residential buildings.
Well, I would think that's why they asked for the engineering information as well.
Right.
So once again, in the email thread, BSA said they asked for revised financial and engineering information. So that really, addresses exactly what you're saying, Steve. What's it going to cost to remove it, and what does it do to the adjacent buildings if you remove it?
James has a question, Wayne.
Yes. Whose engineers do we use to discover this?
Well,
Is it their own engineers, or are there engineers that work for the city that analyze this?
well, no, I mean, any applicant, must provide the Board of Standards and Appeals with whatever engineering, architectural, environmental, or financial work. BSA will review that, but it's the applicant's responsibility, and it's also their cost to, you know, prepare those studies. Anything further on Cumming Street application?
Well, I just would want to point, out, maybe for James's benefit, that the Board of Standards and Appeals, its membership is to be made up of a registered architect with at least 10 years experience, a licensed professional engineer, also with at least 10 years experience as an engineer, a planner also with at least 10 years experience as a planner. So presumably the members of this board themselves have the capability to review and analyze these engineers' reports and other materials that are being presented to them.
Thank you, Steve. That's very comforting. I'm glad to hear that. Thank you
Yeah.
for that clarification.
But I would also assume that just like, you know, city planning or landmarks, the actual board will rely on and refer applications to staff
Yes.
to review in detail,
Right.
and to bring that summary information, you know, to them, and not just have it be, you know, the actual members of the board who are doing the analysis. So it's, you know, at a staff level, and then at a more detailed discussion once it gets to the equivalent of the commissioners.
Yeah, I'm sure that's the case. I would also like to just clarify something that Jim said about the Parks Department building at the western end of Dyckman Street. It's not used for storage. It's the district headquarters for the parks operations in northern Manhattan. It houses the staff.
And then staff are very small people, and they sit in tiny chairs.
As well as it also contains bathrooms for the public.
I see a hand raised from, is it Tyne?
Yes, hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, hi, thank you so much. My name is Tina Bürster. I was on last time too. And I don't want to belabor this or anything. I have studied that hearing and I was on it. So I can just report that there's controversy in terms of the cost analysis for the rock, for dealing with the rock, where the BSA Commissioner Schetter, who is the structural engineer, claims that they're inflating the cost associated with this and completely ignoring the benefits from the rock presence on savings on support features for the building. And that the developer himself admitted that the issues stem from a desire to use the CELDA transferable rights that they were given from the church. And so the financial commissioner, Otley Brown, stated that she thought it reeks of self-created hardship. So I just wanted to make that. I would be very interested in you guys hearing this in March, because my understanding is that we are not going to have an input purely. We will be informed, which is a step in the right direction, I guess. So thank you so much.
Yeah, and you know, once again, it sounds like the board has asked them for revised, you know, financial and engineering information. So the extent to which there is, you know, controversy or lack of agreement on, you know, what the cost is and what the engineering you know, requirements are. It sounds like those are two of the things that have to be revised and resubmitted to the board by mid-March for the April hearing. So with that, I want to move to item 3 on the agenda, which is really not an update or report for me, but it's, I think, a follow-up to something that Councilman Abreu raised when he met with us, I believe, in November. And that was, how do we envision the request that we've made vis-a-vis rezoning, as the most recent one was the R8, but there are others. How do we envision those proceeding? Meaning, do we see passing a resolution, forwarding it to the Department of City Planning, and the Department of City Planning acting on it? Or do we envision elected officials, be it, his office, Councilwoman De La Rosa's office, our council reps collectively, or the borough president advancing that? And I think that is a worthwhile conversation for us to have, because I could list, and I was going to, but I think it's kind of overkill, the resolutions that over the years, CB12 have passed. Most recently, we talked about having city planning look at, contextual zoning for that R8 area west of Broadway. But, maybe a decade ago, we pointed out that there were several C8 zones in the district, and the C8 is really a automotive and an automotive industry focused zoning, which doesn't allow us, if we wanted to build or convert a building to residential or commercial or anything that isn't automotive, and it doesn't make sense. And we said, you should, change those to something that allows for, a mixture of uses that's more conducive to what we need in terms of, development. So things like that really haven't gone anywhere. If we reflect back on, CB9, when the Manhattanville project was, new, that 197A plan was, let me change it. That rezoning was not a function of the 197A plan that CB9 did, but rather of borough president Scott Stringer taking the key planning, concerns from that plan, and his office advancing the rezoning that results in the zoning that is now in place for Community Board 9. And when that rezoning was over, we were told, and those of you who were on the committee then, and I believe Jim, you were, and Vivian, I believe you were, we were told that city planning was then going to focus its attention on working with CB12, but that never happened. The councilman mentioned to us, when he was with us last time, I think not rezoning, but the historic district designation in the Morningside area, once again in CB9, that either was recently approved or is underway. And that's an initiative that I think Mark Levine's office may have initiated, and his office is continuing. So the question is, do we want to ask our council representatives and or our borough president to say, here are our planning concerns. Here are the resolutions that we've passed over in the most, in the last few years and in the last decade. And we want you to take the lead in moving it through the city planning process, because you can get the traction and you can get the attention that, the board is not getting by just passing these resolutions. So what are your thoughts on that? Aisha?
Yeah, so not in this committee because I'm new to the committee. But on housing, I've raised the concern that I have, which is that when the board does sometimes tremendous work to put forward resolutions which sometimes may take years to come to, sometimes it may take one meeting, right? But at the end of the day, it's the meeting of the minds, and the voice of the board goes out and says, yes, this is what we want or would like to see. But we don't see the advocacy from our board leadership. So, and I don't know if that is the case with land use, because I haven't been on the committee. So I'm interested to know if that is the case, but it's my understanding that that is the charge of the board leadership, especially when we have ratified something, that there should be follow-up. On housing, when I served as chair, one of the things that I advocated for was and I'm gonna maybe botch the address, 2210 Amsterdam and 20 something Arden, where way before I came along, there were resolutions that the board put forth saying that the building fell into district. Oh, Martin Collins is here, so he can definitely speak to that. But that were not for Martin Collins, which was going to be my next sentence before I saw him. We were not doing the advocacy. Martin Collins pushed a lot, and I learned from him, and then I pushed as well, every chance I could. Richard Lewis also, who is our former chair, also pushed. But where is that activity from our leadership? That it should be a systematic process that shouldn't have to be advocated for. It should just be, is my opinion.
Well, I mean, I think, and I see a couple other hands, I think the question of advocacy or follow-up on the part of board leadership and the district manager is something that is key. And we can certainly get feedback, I mean, Catherine is with us, but also from Eli. But the other question is, that I raised is, if our neighbors to the south can have the elected officials, I mean, and I'm sure the reason they did it is because there was advocacy on the part of the board, to get them to do it. But if our neighbors to the south can have the elected officials step up and say, we are going to take the lead to move the community board's priorities through the city planning system, is there any reason why CB12 can't expect the same? Tanya.
Yes, thank you. I think it could go either way. I think it's a double-edged sword. I think in a lot of ways, I definitely agree with what Aisha just said in terms of, I've seen boards where you have a strong district manager who would do that advocacy, who would do that outreach, and who would be on the ball when they would pass resolutions, that person would be the one that's knocking on those doors and making sure that there is action on the part of the agencies, covered under that resolution. And so I think that, that's something that definitely needs to be addressed and improved upon. And part of me says, yes, I think it is very important that the board itself speaks for itself, and is able to maintain that sense of autonomy from the elected. I also see that there is, a good role that the elected officials can play in terms of collaboration, in terms of helping the board to accomplish its goals, as long as that does not go into a territory where, the control of that direction is in the hands of the elected officials. Like there has to be a line in terms of, yes, they are, we want to look at them as can be partners in some of our, obviously what's important to us should be also important to them. But sometimes some things may be contrary to what is important to us, or the priorities may be different. And so it's just a matter of balance and how to maintain that balance, because not every collaboration is for the benefit of the community. You know, so you know, we've seen that with the stalling of this discussion that we've been trying to have with the about the proposed name change / now historic district. But you know, so I guess there's just a trepidation on my part for, you know, without that balance, without those lines and how what that collaboration would look like. But I also just want to make sure that the board itself maintains its voice and can find its own power in doing these things and doing that advocacy and being that voice for the community and not relying so much on the elected officials to do it. I don't know, maybe perhaps there is this, I think the question I have is, where is the disconnect in terms of the agencies or whatever that we're asking these things of in terms of their opinion of the boards, that what we're asking for is not being addressed or we're being ignored, or there's a deeper discussion there, right?
Yeah,
Like-
there is a deeper discussion, but there's also a question of, you know, community boards have an advisory role. And the prior mayor, early on when we were talking about mandatory inclusionary and, you know, zoning for affordability, and, you know, I remember CB12's resolution, and I think several other community boards citywide are in a similar position, and we did not say we were against it. We said the way it was written was too broad brush, and it needed to allow for, you know, neighborhood differences. And, you know, Mayor de Blasio was like, well, you know, community board role is advisory and I don't really have to listen to it. And then kind of he or one of his representatives was attending a meeting said, well, that's not really what he said. But that is in fact, you know, what occurred. And it's not as if, you know, CB12 is not raising these matters. And I think, Tanya, you've been in a number of the meetings when we're talking to city planning and saying, well, you know, we passed this resolution, you know, 2 years ago or 10 years ago, here's a copy of the resolution. And, you know, there've been a number of instances where we've considered BSA applications. And we pointed, the only reason we're considering that is because the building is sitting in a C8 zone. And the only thing that can happen there as of right is automotive use. And the fact that a school or, you know, a business wants to locate in part of that is perfectly, you know, reasonable, but zoning won't allow it. And had they acted on that resolution, which also goes back to when Scott Stringer was borough president, we wouldn't need to deal with that now, because it was a statement of, you know, what we thought made sense. And, you know, sometimes resolutions are really off the wall. I don't think there was anything off the wall about any, you know, of the resolutions we passed. We said, you know, this doesn't make sense, you know, be more flexible. And we weren't even like dictating it has to be X. It's like, be more flexible to allow for uses that would be conducive to community and economic development. Martin, I see your hand. Let me, actually, are you muted? Or I think you're already unmuted, Martin.
I am, thank you. Yes, we pushed forward that resolution and under George Fernandez and then closed the loop.
Which resolution?
21 Auden and 2110 Amsterdam. And it took about 5 years and repeated outreach to HPD and finding out whose desk those applicate, because they were in 2 different packages, 2 different programs at HPD, writing to them, copying the borough president. We had the benefit of having not just the borough president, but both council members, because 21 Auden was in Mark Levine's district at that time. And in Adonis Rodriguez's district at the time, and 2110 Amsterdam in council member Levine's district at that time. And so we had the push from Gail, Mark, Adonis, the community board chairs, Fernandez, and then Lewis, and repeated efforts by individuals, including myself, to see that that resolution had life and did not sit and collect dust. Because if it's not a 30-story building or it's south of 110th Street, HPD often doesn't seem to really give a hoot. You have to chase them down like a cat chasing a ball of yarn and make them know that the board is serious. It has the political muscle behind it. and that those elected officials are reaching out. And I know in one case with 2110 Amsterdam, they were very slow. I called Mark got a hold of whoever at HPD was responsible, and all of a sudden the pendulum began to move. And the same is true at any other properties. And these resolutions that we have and we will consider going forward to address needs and respects to housing and land use in the Community Board 12 district need to have that same push from the board leadership and the elected officials, the political muscle behind it. Because in the final analysis, the board, yes, although it is only advisory, but if it has the political clout behind it, it brings that resolution and its recommendations to life.
And that is exactly, my point. I think the board, the land use committee, in the time that I've been on, the committee, has done a decent job in, crafting resolutions, that pertain to, our planning and zoning priorities that are reasonable, that make sense. And we've had, follow-up conversations with, city planning and with, the HPD on one occasion and landmarks, but we need to have the persistent backing of our elected officials to move the needle. And so to Tanya's point, as I mentioned, with CB9's rezoning, it wasn't Scott Stringer's planning priorities. CB9 came up with a plan, but that plan, and Steve Simon has pointed this out many times in the past, 197A plans have no force of law. They're advisory. So the borough president took the key planning concepts from that Community Board 9 plan and put that in a rezoning that he worked with CB9 on to move through it. It didn't become the Scott Stringer So from my perspective, if we did a planning study with City College, which is still accessible to everyone, it's online. We've done, more recent resolutions. The resolution that we did in the context of the inward rezoning addressed a number of issues. So there are a number of things that we can say, here are our priorities. And we understand everything can't be done at once, but what is our current 1, 2, and 3? And we need, you, borough president, you, council reps, to provide that political push so that, city planning isn't just considering it, which they are. They're considering it, and they asked us to provide them with our thoughts on what, zoning districts might use, which we provided back in May or June, but it's now January. I haven't heard anything since. So that's my thought. I think, we're doing our job, and we need that partnership so that once we've done our job, we know that there are people going to help us to make it a reality. I remember going back to 2009 when I think it's this Audubon Park district was under consideration. Robert Jackson was the councilman at the time, and I asked him what he thought about that. He said, no, what does the community board think about that? You tell me what your position is and I will back you. Tanya.
Yeah, definitely, Wayne. I totally, we're on the same page in terms of that, in terms of they can definitely move the needle. They can definitely make things happen that we, can't, so we agree on that. I guess just where I'm coming from, well, not I guess, I know where I'm coming from, is that, just, while they're being used in this way, it's always good to also think a little bit deeper in terms of just making sure that, if they're going to champion the things that we feel are important, all of those things are championed, not the outrageous, something. I haven't seen anything really crazy come out of us, in terms of resolutions, but you know, in terms of making sure that all of those things would be championed. And it doesn't become political as we're collaborating with political, you know what I mean? So that's where that's the only caveat that I had, is that's to make sure that that happens, that it's done, that those board priorities are equitable and that they are being championed equitably, and that things that people may be sort of opposed to or not comfortable with, that, you know, those things are not neglected, right? So that's the only thing, the only thing I added on top of everything that you said that I totally agree with. Thank you.
Other committee members, your thoughts, because at the end of the day, we're the ones who are doing the lion's share and bringing something to the board to adopt, and then the board will bring it to elected officials to say, we want you to support it. So what are your thoughts?
I think collaboration is a good thing. I mean, Tanya makes valid points. And, you know, there have been numerous resolutions that this committee has put forth to city planning that have gotten nowhere. Probably our best one was that all these low buildings, like all these 5- and 6-story buildings scattered all over our neighborhood, they should actually own the sunlight that hits them. And no one can interfere with it. Because all these places are places to build solar cells, and nothing became of that either. So if we had allies, that might help.
Other thoughts? Committee members, you know, we got to be active. So, I mean, I'm getting ready to retire and buy a villa in Tuscany. So, got to be active. What are your thoughts, Steve?
Well, my suggestion would be that that maybe we have a subcommittee meet with the borough president's staff, with the borough president himself, his land use planning staff. I think only the borough president really has the capability to take a lead on this, and as Stringer did with respect to Board 9. And I think, you know, before we do that, we need to sift through all of those resolutions.
Exactly.
There are maybe too many of them for this purpose, and they don't all say the same thing. So we need to decide on our priorities, and maybe at a future point have a small group meet with the borough president and ask him to take this on.
I agree, Aisha. Aisha, you're muted.
Am I the only one getting feedback? I'm getting some type of
Yeah, I was getting feedback from when you unmuted.
Hold on one second. If you want to go to someone else, I'm not sure if there's other hands raised. Let me rectify this.
There was, but not anymore.
Okay, I'm not sure why that's happening.
Yeah, it's not that bad. Go ahead.
Okay, so I feel like, and I know you are extremely organized, Wayne, but I feel like the board itself needs to kind of clean house in regards to, because one of the things that was said is we need to dig through and figure out what all the things are. And I know that that doesn't only apply to this committee, but committees in general. And I feel like the conversation that needs to be happening, I agree with what you're saying. And we need to have a system in place so that it tracks that conversation, because I feel like once things are ratified and they go out, what mechanism exists to say whether they've responded or not, whether they've read it or not, whether they agree with it or not, whether they're going to do it or not, whether they're going to fund it or not. It really doesn't exist except for within the budget ranking process. And even that is a little murky in regards to the responses that we sometimes get back. Sometimes we don't even know whether what they have said is an indication of their intention to follow through on it. So I feel like getting into the weeds of that process and implementing some basic technology to begin with, but definitely there could be sophisticated mechanisms that could be implemented for all community boards so that anything that we do, anything that we ratify that goes out to agencies, elected officials, or otherwise, that there's a way of knowing where we are at this point.
Yeah, and I don't disagree, and I recall in years past, Steve raising the point on a number of occasions about our not really having a sense of what is happening, with resolutions that we pass, and what has worked. And I was going to say, unfortunately, I don't know if it's unfortunately enough, but what has worked is when, certain committee chairs has taken it upon themselves to, make sure they get, the information. The budget ranking really isn't, the only way to find out what it is. The monthly borough board meetings, can, and in the past have been used, to bring issues to the forefront of the table, with the borough president. I have not attended, one of those meetings or been asked to attend one of those since I think, when Pam North was chair, she asked me to sit in a couple times. And I think when Shaw was chair, but, Catherine is chair now. And, one of the things we might, recommend that she do is to use, the borough board meetings to focus on, CB12, or use it as an opportunity to focus on CB12 priorities and find out, where things are, and if we need the borough president's office to help to step in and help get a response from city agencies, because in many cases, it's either the borough president or the city council rep that has to, go to the commissioner or whomever and say, listen, you're not responding. Other questions, comments? Steve, again?
Yeah, I want to follow up on what Aisha said, actually, and what you said, because for quite a long time, I made the point similar to what the point that Aisha's been raising, that there is no follow-up, that it's extremely frustrating to be passing resolutions and not getting responses, or not having our own board try to elicit a response. And I've said I said repeatedly over a period of time, over a period of years, that if you don't get a response in 3 or 4 weeks, you call up the agency to which you directed the resolution and you ask them for a response. And I mean, it just amazes me that we don't seem to do that. And more recently, I once again asked that our district manager follow up on a resolution that our board passed in June about asking the state health commissioner not to allow Neo-Presbyterian to close the psych unit at the Allen Hospital. And that resolution was directed at a commissioner who left office at the end of last week. And I wanted to make sure that we at least made an effort to get that response before she left office. And apparently that didn't happen either. So I agree with Aisha that it is extremely frustrating. I won't say that every single resolution passed by our board necessarily deserves a response, but certainly I think we're entitled to ask for one, and I take that back. Every resolution we pass does deserve a response, and we're certainly entitled to ask for one.
Vivian?
I wonder to what extent it's appropriate, but it may give us more power to know what other community boards are passing and where where there are actually issues in which we are in harmony and maybe as together might be able to be more effective in terms of making things happen. I mean, do we know what comes through other community boards?
Well, I mean, I certainly can't answer that, but I do know that at one point, the 4 uptown community boards, 9, 10, 11, and 12, that the chairs would meet periodically, because certainly, and I mentioned this on a number of occasions as it pertains to, land use and affordable housing issues, the things that are important to Washington Heights and Inwood impact Central Harlem, West Harlem, and East Harlem. So once again, Catherine is, on this meeting with us. I don't know if that process continued when Eleazar was chair, or for that matter, if all 4, uptown community boards still do that. If they don't, I would suggest that's something that, gets a kickstart, once again. Because what is happening, on the Upper West Side may not be, as pertinent, although in some cases it may, but certainly, community boards 9, 10, 11, and 12 have a lot in common. But also, once again, this goes back to what one can glean from the borough board meetings and how that can be used, because at the borough board, each community board is present and you can hear what's going on.
I think, though, that beyond the northern ones, there are elements of things farther to the south, and they may be more effective in being heard than we are up here. And to some extent, if we agree, if some of the things we have in common, it wouldn't be the worst thing to also, if not piggyback, join with them in efforts.
I don't, disagree. But once again, as I said, that is at the borough board, you have community boards 1 through 12 present. And that's an excellent networking opportunity. It's an excellent opportunity to hear that, on the Lower East Side, they're doing something, or on the Upper East Side, they're doing or saying something that resonates, with us. I think I mentioned when we were talking about MIH, it wasn't just Uptown. I think it was community boards all over the city of New York, which I believe there are 59, that said things very similar to us that, interesting idea, but how do you tailor it so that, the Upper East Side is treated differently than Brooklyn Heights? And, that really didn't get an opportunity to, to go anywhere. I think it's also similar to the discussion with the open streets and the restaurants. It's once again, before you make it permanent, before you do away with all of the old rules, why don't you really take a closer look at how the pilot program worked, what needs to be fixed so that you don't get garbage and rats, and then implement something new. We said that, but many other community boards, said that. Anything further on, this, the topic was a strategy for advancing our initiatives. Anything more on this? I see Steve.
I'll let Steve go and he raised his hand.
Yeah, I just want to clarify that before we would go to the borough president, and then I think we need to have not a meeting through the borough board, but a direct face-to-face meeting. But before we even take that step, I think we need to make sure that we have the board as a whole behind us, and that we're not acting on our own as a committee. And so, I would certainly want to at least have the support of the executive committee, if not the board as a whole, on any strategy that we would follow.
I agree.
So my question was, so first my question is there any jurisdictional issue that we would have to worry about in regards to initiatives specifically that land use wants to put forward? Are there electeds that would have a hand or not, depending on what their position is? Or is it something that any elected could push forward for us?
Well, I mean, in theory, any elected could push forward, but think about the politics of it. If you have a councilman from Brooklyn who is, championing a rezoning in, Manhattan, the Manhattan council person whose district is going to say, wait a minute, we need to have a talk. The first line of defense, would be to go to your council representatives, plural, because they're elected to represent you and to work with you. And as Councilman Abreu pointed out, the redrawn council districts has it such that R8 area that is west of Broadway from 155th to 177th, that's actually now split between him and Carmen. So if we're talking about, that initiative, it, realistically should require both of them working with us. When we met with Carmen De La Rosa, not quite a year ago, but several months ago, she mentioned some of the areas that we were talking about were not in her area. They were in, Councilman Abreu's area, but she was more than happy to work with us and with him on that. And I think, we're only represented by two, having both of them, work with us, would be an ideal thing to do. And I agree with Steve. It probably does make sense to have, the Manhattan Borough President, which has jurisdiction and staff with, the ability to still take the lead. But they would also be working, with us and, with our city council reps. I am pretty certain that when you come to issues like affordable housing that is affordable to the people who actually live in the area, and if you talk about new development that, respects the scale and character of the neighborhood within which it is to occur, we hear those conversations happening in all of the boroughs. So I would think, in terms of, jurisdiction or where people, may want to support, I think, there will definitely be some who, will agree. There will be some who have, concerns, but even here, and I don't know if you were in that meeting, Aisha, one of the points that, Councilman Abreu pointed out is particularly in the climate and the environment of the city council now, just talking about, down zoning and, not allowing anything that is, bigger than a bread box, doesn't sound like a sound planning strategy, because what are your thoughts about, where can growth be accommodated in your neighborhood, your community district? So there is a balance. But I mean, that's part of the conversation that needs to be had.
Okay. Where I was leaning towards is, so definitely I understand we wouldn't be talking to outer borough representatives specifically. We would be dealing with our own elected officials for our district, but I'm assuming where council members are concerned that initiatives that they push forward might have to be voted on in the council, so this is where I'm a layperson where land use is concerned specifically, but do they have discretion over things that they can push forward without it having to rise to a council vote? And would the borough president have more leeway as borough president to institute certain initiatives without needing a council vote, or like, yeah, so I want to understand more.
Yeah, that's a good point, because if you're looking at the ULURP process, and there's a nice one pager that I can circulate to everyone so that they can either use it as a refresher to understand it. The first step in the uniform land use review process, once city planning has certified a zoning application is ready for review, the very first step is the community board. And the next step is the borough president. But the place at which, binding votes are taken, and the entity that has actually the ability to negotiate, and that's one of the things that, we discussed decades ago, some of the things that the community board may negotiate with the applicant are not binding because we don't have the ability to do that. The city council, however, does have the ability to have binding negotiations. And I'm not certain if the borough presidents, if they have the ability to do binding negotiations, although maybe so
They don't.
you're right. So it's the council is Aisha, that's an important partner to have. And one of the things that is tradition, although it's now being questioned, is member deference, meaning if there is a land use matter in my district, I mean the district that I'm the council person for, typically the council will defer to the council person whose district is on whether it's up or down or whatever. In some instances, and this has happened in a couple of cases in the last year or so, where it's felt that either the council person is completely missing the boat, or that what is being proposed is too important for it to be approved or disapproved just on it's in my backyard. But for something like do you want to have contextual zoning west of Broadway, do you want certain corners along Broadway to be increased or whatever, that's something where the local council people would typically take the lead and the other council reps would follow normally. Kimberly.
Sorry, so I was wondering, I was thinking about what Aisha and a couple of other members have said, that there are a lot of resolutions, and I am new, and I was wondering if it's possible to see what some of them are, because it does, just based on what I'm hearing so far, it does seem like we would have to be into some kind of agreement as to what we want to prioritize and sort of push. And so if we can see them, and then we as a group can come together and then decide like, well, these are the 5 or these are the 10 that we really want to focus on, then those are the ones that we can, really get behind and focus on and keep reaching out to, the appropriate people to try to get past.
Yeah, I agree. And I would say, I would ask the office to pull together those residents, something, but I probably have copies of all of them on my computer. And I was going to sort of put together a list and copies, but I thought that might have been overkill for tonight. I wanted us to have the conversation first. But certainly the resolutions that I mentioned in terms of contextual zoning and, C8, the discussion of the R8, I don't know if that went to a resolution yet, but it certainly was discussed in detail. I will pull together those documents and send it to the committee so that everyone has an opportunity to review that. With regard to the planning study that I mentioned that we did with City College, if you go to CB12's website and under, I think, land use and zoning resources, there's a link to that study on the website. And also as part of that, there is an executive summary. The entire study is a few hundred pages, but the executive summaries, I think, maybe 30 pages or so. And what's interesting is there is a single map towards the back of that study that sort of visually pulls a lot of things together. So there are areas circled, where, there was discussion of, historic designation. There are areas circled where, there was discussion of preserving neighborhood character. There were certain corridors, typically like Broadway, Amsterdam, St. Nicholas, and certain nodes where there was a discussion of that being opportunities for maybe increased density. So that visually, puts, in sort of a snapshot, what was being discussed back, in 2007. And I think a lot of that, conceptual thinking, still makes a lot of sense as you move away from the major avenues. The scale, the residential scale is something, that most people like and should be preserved. And as you're along the avenues, I mean, there are a couple of, corner sites where you've got a one-story supermarket that easily could be an 8-story apartment building with ground floor retail. Tanya.
Sorry about that. I was muted. Yeah, remember, also, I think another piece that, in terms of people to bring into this with you and this committee, remember we talked a little bit about the CEC, the Civic Engagement Commission, that was part of that series of referendums that we voted on.
Yep.
And perhaps because they could be brought into, because
the question is, what are they doing?
Right. And they could be brought into the conversation about in what way, since they have a direct connection to City Hall, obviously being appointed by the mayor, that they could, probably be a part of helping us, the community boards, to advance, to get responses from the agencies targeted in our resolutions, or, so it's just another piece of it that could go in there, I think.
Yeah, we did raise that, and it's unfortunately it's a probably another case where we haven't gotten the feedback, because we did suggest that the office find out who the contact was and reach out to that Civic Engagement Commission to find out sort of what are you doing to work with community boards, because that commission actually took some responsibilities away from the borough presidents. So the borough presidents aren't going to do it. What are you doing? And I haven't, gotten any response yet, but, as I said, Catherine is still on the line with us, so she's hearing all of this, so she can circle back with Ebenezer and company, and, or even at the borough board and say, who's the contact with Civic Engagement, and, what are they doing? I checked out their website when we had that conversation, and I saw a few things about like voter registration and whatever, but I didn't see any planning initiatives.
Same. Sure. But one would think that they could help the board,
You would
the community
think.
boards, to have that sort of connection to these agencies to get responses. You would think. Well, anyway, sorry.
Well, I mean, that goes back to what was the real intention in creating that, and not to revisit it, but not everyone thought it was a great idea to take that responsibility away from the borough presidents and basically put it under the mayor, because that commission is now reports to the mayor, and so the borough presidents are the ones who, along with the council reps, appoint the community board members, and the community boards kind of have a reporting structure to the borough president. So why does it make sense to take some of the responsibilities for working with community boards like away from the borough presidents and putting in a commission that's under the mayor, and then we don't hear from them? But anyway, so I think that was a good. Is there any old business? Although a lot of this was old business. Is there any new business? Aisha?
So I've had this discussion with you, Wayne, but to let the committee know. So I'm in school to become a real estate appraiser. I'm already certified in appraisal principles in 6 states. I'm doing USPAP and procedures now. And in that, I've learned about the Appraisal Standards Board practice of having public hearings so that they could develop exposure drafts to better inform the appraisal community. And in that, they look for input from the public, government, representatives of different institutions, both in nonprofit and in for-profit industries. And I'm just wondering, there's a lot of changes that have come to the appraisal industry. There's a lot of focus that's been put on the disproportionate valuation, specifically for people of color in the United States. There are even legal efforts that are in process to remediate some of the negative impact that has happened because of inequity in those spaces. And the White House has gotten involved in wanting to shape changes in that arena. The cohort that I am in, which is the first of its kind from the New York Mortgage Coalition and the Appraisal Institute, is part of that effort to create a balance, because my understanding is 90% of appraisers are white men. And so they're attempting to bring equity so that there are more people that are gonna have a balanced approach to appraisal. But so what I wanted to know is, has there been a history in the land use committee of weighing in on matters in that space? And is that something that you see might be beneficial? Are there ideas that would benefit our district and our community where valuation of properties are concerned, where you see an opportunity to speak into that, or is it already done?
I do not believe we've ever had any specific discussion with organizations about the appraisal process. But as a planner, and actually I attended NYU's Real Estate Institute decades ago. I think it would be worthwhile to have representatives of the board or the industry attend a land use committee to discuss, what they are focused on and why.
Okay.
I mean, we all know the role that, redlining played and the impact it continues to have. And, when I was doing, community and economic development in Harlem and, all of Upper Manhattan, there were instances when it came to lending and appraisal where, stuff was happening. So it certainly is a land use and planning, concern.
Okay. So hopefully we can talk more about that, and I can speak back with people on my side.
If you can identify like the organization or organizations and, some point people, we can arrange to see when we could have them, come and talk to us.
Okay, excellent. Looking forward. Thank you.
Sure. Vivian.
Hold on. I was just going to say it's not a major issue here, but this Friday digitally there'll be an article by John Freeman Gill about the terrace, Audubon Terrace. It's more about Hispanic society than it is about the academy, even though he is aware of some of our issues with the academy's efforts to sort of change their envelope and whatever. But
which paper?
The New York Times, sorry. Shouldn't just call it the paper. They're not the only paper, but Anyway, it's supposed to run on paper either this Sunday or the following, but it will be digitally available this Friday. So it just seems worthwhile that we should all know this.
Sure. And if you get it digitally on Friday, you can maybe share it. Steve.
Am I muted? Where am I?
You're right there, Steve.
Can't find. Oh, you can hear me. Very good.
Yes.
I want to follow up on Aisha's thing on the appraisal process.
Appraisal.
To the extent that it impacts the property tax assessment system, it would certainly have a great deal of impact on our community since rental properties, class 2 residential properties, rentals are assessed at a higher rate, I believe, than almost any other property. Maybe not commercial properties, but when it comes to residential properties, we're assessed at a higher rate and a higher effective rate than other such properties. And we may not feel it because it's buried somewhere in our rents, but we are paying it. And since Washington Heights and Inwood has such a huge share of rental properties, it's certainly an issue that should be of concern to us. And there have been efforts from time to time to reform that property tax assessment system, and I think there may even be some commission up in Albany working on it theoretically. But I mean, that to me is where the appraisal process really becomes relevant to those of us who live in the residential rental properties.
Well, I think there are two issues. You hit upon one, but what I heard Aisha saying is there is a concern in the industry as well as in the architectural industry on the lack of diversity. And that impacts the outcome of a number of things. And I will tell you that in 1987, when I moved to the co-op that I had now, the appraiser was some wet behind the ear guy from Long Island, and the appraisal made really no sense at all. Working on residential development in Harlem, we had some appraisers who got it and some appraisers who it's like they were not doing a professional job. I mean, I took the courses that are required in order to sit for the exam to become an appraiser, and they were not doing a professional job. So it's that lack of diversity or lack of understanding that, as my godfather said, they don't know what they don't know, how it's impacting the ability for projects to move forward. It's impacting the ability for people to buy homes. And a lot of that is a function of, who is doing the appraisal work, and when they're in neighborhoods that don't look just like them, the level at which their professional work is delivered changes.
But isn't it fair to say that these appraisals affect the property tax assessment?
But property tax is I think, one of the issues, Steve.
Yeah. Okay.
Property tax impact you, but the appraisal, on whether an appraiser, how they see something differs if they're looking at Steve Simon or if they're looking at Wayne Benjamin. Okay.
It does. I take both points. I think they're both serious concerns. I'm not sure if everyone on the committee is aware, there's been a lot of stories that have come out. One, for instance, where a family had to remove every ethnic remnant of themselves from their home in order to get an appropriate valuation, which I believe once they did, it's like $1 million difference what they were getting in a valuation when the appraiser didn't know that they were Black. So there's the racial equity, but there's definitely the
Yeah,
economic.
as I said, there are both. There are both. So let's not just focus on the categories of buildings, which is important. And there was an interesting article, I think, in coming out of the Furman Center, how there is apparently some loophole where you can build large single-family homes on lots and have them classified as condominiums, and a condominium is taxed at a lower rate than a single-family home. So I mean, there are things like that, which we really do need to look into. But there's also, what's the impact of, race and, racism on the appraisal and the home lending and the real estate industry, and how does all of that impact, planning and neighborhoods, and all of that really does fall into the sphere of interest of a land use committee. James Bosley.
Yeah, hi. I saw an article today in the Patch that there are 3 30-foot tall 5G poles there's a plan to install them in our area. One at Fort Washington and 190th Street, one at 727 Fort Washington, and the other one at 11 Nagel Avenue near Hillside Avenue. Is this something that I'm sure the board has dealt with in the past, but being new, I'm just wondering what our opinions were on these and what our purview is over these constructions.
Yeah, I saw that article too, and my sense is if those towers are going to be installed on the sidewalk, that would go to traffic and transportation. But I can check.
Okay. So this is not an issue that the board has discussed in the past.
Well, I mean, 5G towers are fairly new. We've discussed, other towers on top of buildings. I think Health and Environment may have done that because there was some, concern about, the impact of radio waves. But I mean, if you're installing something on the sidewalk, like, last year we were talking about some historical district signage. Land use talked about it because it was one of them was being installed in historic district, but all of them had to go to traffic and transportation because they were being installed on the sidewalk. So I would think that, and I will ask I'll ask Debbie directly, but I'll also ask the district manager, which committee is looking at that.
It's not clear in this article where exactly they're going to be installed. But the intent is altruistic. They're trying to get more internet to more people in areas that are underserved. I was just wondering if we had discussed that in the past, and I was not on the board at this point. It's an interesting subject. Thank you.
You're welcome. Steve, is that an old hand or a new hand?
No, I'm following up. It's a new hand. I'm following up on James's question because after seeing that Patch story, I asked Ebenezer and Catherine to have Ebenezer do some research and reach out to the city agency dealing with this issue, the Office of Technology and Innovation. First of all, to see whether or not the community board ever received an official notification of this plan. Ebenezer says we did not receive any notice, and or of the fact that there's a public comment period. So as of this afternoon, as far as I know, Ebenezer is still trying to reach out to that agency and get the information to see what our role is and what the story is about these installations. And I believe in one of these emails, either he or Catherine indicate that some of these towers may already have been installed in our community unbeknownst to us. So right now we're at a disadvantage. We don't have the information, and we're still trying to get it. I've suggested that maybe this issue should come before the executive committee because the executive committee at least meets at about the time when this public comment period is supposed to run out on the 16th. And
Yeah.
Catherine had said at one point that she was going to request an extension of the comment period to allow us to weigh in.
Yeah, well, I mean, we definitely do need to get the information, and, you know, it's when you have any of these, you know, initiatives that have public hearing and comment periods, and it includes holidays, it's kind of disingenuous not to allow for additional time.
Well, I find it a little difficult to believe that we never received any notification, but if we didn't, that's really a problem. I mean, you know, at a minimum, we should have been notified.
Right. I see Catherine's hand is up.
Yeah, hi everyone. Good evening. First of all, thank you, Wayne, and for every folks for sending the panelist link to me. It's been a real joy to listen closely to the committee, and I'm making my rounds this week on the other ones. I just raised my hands quickly to speak on this. Yeah, so essentially we did not, is my take, and then but we're not alone in not receiving notice on both the public comment period or on the 3 towers on Fort Washington. The towers that Steve was referring to earlier are the ones on Nagel Avenue, or I think it's just one actually on Nagel Avenue. So they're, you know, we're definitely working on that closely tomorrow. I know some folks may be coming to health and environment because of, you know, public health related questions that they have, but absolutely traffic and transportation. So definitely I would say stay on the lookout for email as we work to gather information and try to secure either, you know, a presentation, a formal response, something from the agency. There's, I mean, online you can find on their website a little bit about the general scope of what they're doing and why Washington Heights, because of equity goals around internet access, was selected. But in terms of anything else specific to the locations of Fort Washington Avenue, that's not publicly available. So yeah, so I would just say stay on the lookout. I know a lot of folks have been interested for many different reasons and questions they have on those.
Mm-hmm. Right. Steve, is that an old hand or a new hand?
It's an old hand, but you should take a look at the David Tom's comment.
Yeah.
David Tom has some information that may be that appears to be useful.
Yeah, they're part of the the same thing has been kind of like what I've been reading. I don't like to speak if it's not like hard confirmed, and that's what I was told, but it does seem that it wasn't necessarily like required for them to present in front of the board to necessarily get that. It's just that it's public comment period, and obviously, you know, for any initiatives and just by Googling the 5G towers, lots of community boards have questions, and community groups. It's a hot topic and a space for education. So, you know, it was, you know, to like what Wayne said, right? Like it was very disingenuous, and, you know, on their behalf, they need to do better to give proper notice. So, you know, I think there's opportunity here to establish a better relationship and more information from that office.
Absolutely.
How would you know there's a public comment period unless there's a public notice?
Right. So that's what I've been trying to get, right? The patch article kept referring to it, but when you go to their website, when you go through some of like the registrars, I didn't see it. So that's why I'm like, I'm still after I got that contact today and shared it with Ebenezer, and gonna follow up again tomorrow on it, trying to get, you know, where that is, because, you know, there was that one comment, and folks are going to go to your committee tomorrow to comment, but they should know where to submit also formal comments as individuals or as community groups.
But I would also point out that, you know, if this is part of some city, you know, franchise, and, you know, the city has franchises for a range of things, but once again, that's a function of city government and the borough president's office, and the city council reps must have some knowledge of, you know, what franchises are being considered and working their way, you know, through the system. So there has to be a better way of, there are times when you are not required to make certain presentations, but at least if folks are informed, they can give you any comment, any feedback that they may have, whether or not a formal comment or formal presentation is, required. And, we have these conversations over the years, with city agencies, and even some, developers. If you look at the Holy Trinity Church came to the community board over the space of 2 years to tell us what they were thinking about, what they were working on. None of that was required, but it was a way of kind of keeping us in the loop. Aisha.
So for about 3 years, I've worked with Silicon Harlem, and I know that this is
I know them well.
definitely on the forefront of their mission. They talk a lot about the inequity of access to broadband, for instance, and I know that they had achieved, there was some movement where they accomplished where things were going to be implemented. I think they would probably know a lot about how things are being rolled out, because I know that they're in touch with providers as well as elected officials and in the forefront of pushing things forward as well. Just a thought.
So we could reach out to them and see if there's any information they can share with us.
Sure. And I just wanted to say, if there is a public hearing, then in the essence of time, of course, it should go before the executive committee, but there is a task force that exists that this seems to fall right within the purview of, which is the Information Technology and Telecommunications Task Force.
It would be great if we had the information, though.
True.
Yeah, well, sorry, Aisha, what was the latter part of the group you said was Silicon what?
Silicon Harlem.
Silicon Harlem, okay.
Clayton Banks is the president or CEO. I'm not sure his exact title. He's a co-founder.
Yep.
Okay, cool.
I know
but like, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, I said I know Clayton.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else under new business? Okay, it's 8:41. Is there a motion to adjourn? Committee members, you are all silent.
We want to stay.
I want to finish my champagne.
Wayne, there is a.
I just unmuted. So is it Tina?
Yes, Tina, yes. I just, not to delay this ending, I just want to thank all of you. I am so in awe of your commitment and depth of understanding. And I just want to really thank you for the work that you do. Thank you.
Well, thank you for your kind words.
I move we adjourn, however much we all love each other and enjoy this immense.
I second.
Second, yeah.
Good night, all.
Night.
Right.
Night.